Some cases leave people asking questions not just about what happened, but how, why, and whether it could have been prevented. Few stories raise those questions as sharply as the killing of 4-year-old Ella Bennett in Abilene, Texas, not by a stranger, but by her own 13-year-old brother. It was an event that shocked a community, captivated national attention, and forced countless people to confront difficult realities about family, mental health, and the darkest parts of human behavior. This is the full story of Paris Bennett and the murder of his sister, Ella. Paris Lee Bennett was born in October 1993 to Charity Lee and James Robert Bennett Jr. Charity had a turbulent childhood herself, marked by the death of her father and ongoing family struggles. As a young adult, she grappled with addiction and personal loss, but eventually got clean and raised her children with an earnest desire for stability and a better future. Ella Bennett entered the world on April 12, 2002, a bright, active, and typical young girl who loved play and family time. By all outward appearances, she was the cherished youngest member of the Bennett family. Paris and Ella grew up in a shifting home life, at times moving between states and living with extended relatives as Charity tried to find stability. Those who knew Paris described him as intelligent and articulate, but by his early teens there were signs of profound internal struggles. Family accounts and records show that he exhibited disturbing behavior from a young age, including violent outbursts, emotional volatility, and early ideation suggesting an inability to regulate his impulses. At times, these behaviors led to psychiatric evaluations and hospital stays, but the treatments he received were inconsistent and often inadequate. Even so, no one could have fully anticipated the horror that would unfold. By 2007, Charity was working at a local Buffalo Wild Wings restaurant in Abilene, frequently putting in late shifts to support her family. On the night of February 4, 2007, she arranged for a babysitter to watch both Paris and Ella while she worked. The children had dinner together, watched movies, and seemed to be behaving normally. The babysitter later reported that Paris appeared outwardly calm and that nothing about the evening suggested an impending tragedy. At around 10 p.m., Paris asked the babysitter to leave early, telling her he could handle the household, concerned but trusting that the situation was under control. She agreed and left. What happened next would become the darkest moment in the Bennett family's history. Sometime before 11:30 p.m., Paris entered his sister's bedroom while she slept, in a chilling development that would later draw national attention. He stabbed Ella Bennett 17 times. Law enforcement later determined that the injuries were inflicted deliberately and that Paris intended to harm her. After committing the attack, Paris did not immediately call for help. Instead, he called a friend from his school phone list and spoke for approximately 6 minutes. He then placed a call to 911 at 11:42 p.m. During that call to emergency dispatchers, he initially attempted to frame the situation through a false narrative, claiming that he believed his sister was a demon and that he had acted out of fear. He repeatedly stated, "I accidentally killed somebody," and when asked by the dispatcher if he thought she was bleeding, he responded, "Yes, she's bleeding all over the bed." The dispatcher instructed him to begin CPR, and Paris counted through the steps, appearing to follow along even though he was not actually performing them. When authorities arrived shortly thereafter, they found Ella without vital signs, and law enforcement took Paris into custody promptly. The community was devastated. A tiny, energetic child whose life should have stretched decades beyond that night was gone, and the person responsible was still a child himself. News outlets and local authorities scrambled to piece together exactly what had happened and why. Over the following weeks, investigators would learn more about Paris's motives, his state of mind, and the family's background. But nothing could soften the blow of the truth. A young boy had taken his sister's life. In the months after the killing, the details of Paris's actions and intentions became clearer during interviews and legal proceedings. He admitted that he had harbored violent thoughts toward his mother for years, fueled in part by his resentment over her past relapses into drug use. Formerly, he had expressed a desire to kill his mother directly, but as he later said in interviews, he concluded that killing Ella would be more devastating to her. In a conversation with broadcaster Piers Morgan years later, Paris explained that he believed the worst possible way to hurt his mother was to deprive her of both children. The violent logic he used to rationalize his attack on Ella. The legal proceedings that followed were complex. The Texas juvenile justice system handles cases differently than the adult system, because Paris was only 13 at the time of the murder. He could not be charged as an adult in Texas. The minimum age for adult charges is 14. Instead, prosecutors charged him with capital murder in juvenile court. In 2009, Paris pleaded guilty to capital murder and was given the maximum allowable sentence, which in Texas juvenile court was 40 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 20 years. Following his 19th birthday, he was transferred to an adult prison facility to continue serving his sentence. During the investigation and sentencing process, psychiatric evaluations documented significant traits associated with severe behavioral disorders. Some experts noted that Paris displayed a pattern of emotionless detachment, manipulative behavior, and extreme egocentric thinking consistent with what clinical professionals sometimes classify as traits associated with psychopathy. However, Paris himself later stated in interviews that he did not believe himself to be mentally ill or insane, and that he accepted full personal responsibility for the murder, describing his actions as a choice rather than the result of a diagnosable psychological condition. While Paris began his sentence at a juvenile facility, he spent many years in adult prison as he aged. His earliest eligibility for parole comes in February 2027 after 20 years, and at that point he would be in his early 30s if parole were denied. His full release date would come as late as February 2047 for decades after the crime. Years following the murder, Ella's mother, Charity, struggled profoundly with the aftermath. The loss of a child is devastating under any circumstances, but when the perpetrator is her own son, it created an emotional landscape that was extraordinarily painful and complex. Initially, Charity maintained contact with Paris through visits, even bringing her newborn son, Phoenix, born in 2012, to visit him in prison and allowing Phoenix to speak with his brother over the phone. These visits were part of Charity's ongoing struggle to reconcile her love for her son with the grief over her daughter's death. However, over time that contact changed. As Paris grew older and continued to exhibit troubling behavior even while incarcerated, including physical aggression during visitation visits and emotional volatility, Charity concluded that continued visits were no longer safe. She ceased all communication with him and made plans to protect herself and her surviving son once Paris was eligible for parole. Charity also founded the Ella Foundation, an acronym standing for empathy, love, lessons, and action, to support people affected by the criminal justice system. Turning her grief into activism and advocacy, the story of Paris and Ella also reached a broader audience through the 2017 documentary The Family I Had, which explored not only the events of February 2007 but also the wider context of family trauma, addiction, and the ripple effects of violence. In that film and in other interviews, viewers gained insight into how long-standing emotional wounds, unaddressed behavioral issues, and fragmented support systems can culminate in tragedy. Charity Lee's reflections on life after her daughter's death have been both heartbreaking and candid. She has spoken publicly about how the loss of Ella led to her own struggles with depression and substance abuse relapse, and how difficult it was to watch her child suffer in prison and to confront the reality of who her son had become. Despite the overwhelming grief, Charity has also spoken about forgiveness, not condoning Paris's actions, but acknowledging the complexity of her feelings as a mother who loved both of her children. Today, the Bennett family's story remains a stark example of how family dynamics and resolved emotional turmoil and treated behavioral issues, and a lack of effective intervention can lead to irreversible tragedy. Paris Bennett's case continues to be studied not simply because of its sensational details, but because it raises critical questions about adolescent violence, juvenile justice, rehabilitation potential, and the limits of forgiveness. If you found this story important, please take a moment to like the video. It helps more people find these stories and keeps factual true crime alive on this platform. If you want more deeply researched cases told with accuracy, context, and respect, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for watching.